Tonight, Trump's reversal. The U.S. pauses those sweeping 25% tariffs on many Canadian products.
It's just a modification, short term.
Another brief reprieve, but Canada won't relent.
We don't let up until the president takes the threat off the table.
The uncertainty is crippling for businesses, but it's galvanizing Canadians.
My name is Jeff, and we are Canadian!
Scammers stealing identities and filing bogus tax refunds.
I'm just wondering, what's going on? Who got in?
How hackers are getting into CRA accounts, a Fifth Estate investigation. And the online games your kids play could be collecting and sharing their personal data, including their location.
It is really scandalous.
A CBC Marketplace investigation shows us how that can be used to track kids.
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thank you for joining us. Just 2 days after launching his trade war, Donald Trump is pressing pause, delaying those punishing 25% tariffs on many Canadian goods until April 2nd, but doing so defiantly. While signing that fresh executive order, the U.S. president again stated he doesn't need anything from Canada. But it seems that theory will be tested, with Ottawa confirming it will not remove the retaliatory tariffs it's already imposed, and Ontario's premier still vowing to add a 25% tax on electricity exports, saying this delay means nothing. Peter Armstrong now with the sudden shift by the White House and the chaos that led up to it.
It basically makes it more fair.
It's the kind of week that can give you whiplash. Sweeping tariffs one day, sweeping exemptions just 2 days later. Donald Trump now says many Canadian goods, specifically those compliant under the Canada-US-Mexico free trade deal, will be exempt from 25% tariffs until April 2nd. But Trump did not go into detail, instead framing this as a means to help the U.S. auto industry.
It's just a modification, short term, because I didn't want to hurt the American. It would have hurt the American car companies if I did that.
It's been a bit of a roller coaster.
Just hours before the new executive order, hosts at the financial news channel CNBC laughed at Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick's claim that these tariffs will bring back all manufacturing to the United States.
T-shirts,
this is the golden
sneakers,
age,
towels.
and you're talking about it today.
Are we going to make all those things in the United States? None of them are made here. TVs, electronics.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told the Economic Club of New York that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wasn't going to get a break.
If you want to be a numbskull like Justin Trudeau and say, oh, we're going to do this, then tariffs are going to go up.
Tariffs did not, in fact, go up, and within an hour or so, Trump was handing out those exemptions.
One for Canada, one for Mexico.
Yes, sir.
But the threat of tariffs remain a firm fixture on the economic landscape. More tariffs on steel and aluminum are set to be enacted next week. And Trump says he'll impose reciprocal tariffs on any country that has trade restrictions on U.S. goods on April 2nd. All this back and forth on tariffs has only served to drive down business confidence and shake markets.
It makes no sense. The policy generates a lot of backlash for very little payoff.
And yet, Donald Trump maintains his tariffs are working and will remain at the forefront of his economic policy.
So interesting, Peter. This was supposed to be about fentanyl, right? But there was no mention of that today. Instead, obviously, just a lot of questions about the economy.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the tariffs did exactly what everyone said they would. They hurt American businesses. So when they did start to bite, those American business leaders met with Trump, told him this is bad for business, bad for markets. And that, of course, took another dive today. The question, though, is what happens next week or next month, as we aren't even close to being done with this whirlwind.
All right, Peter Armstrong in Washington. Thank you.
You bet.
Donald Trump's tariff pause has done little to mend his tense relationship with this country. As Ashley Burke shows us, federal leaders say retaliatory tariffs are staying until all threats are dropped, and some premiers are planning to take things further.
A red maple leaf, I like that.
A small sign of patriotism during a tense trade war. The Prime Minister starting his morning with a childcare announcement, a day after a heated call with Donald Trump.
I can confirm that it was a colorful call, and it was also a very substantive call.
A Canadian government source says Trump used profanities on that call, ranting about what he sees as unfair Canadian tariffs on dairy.
We will continue to be in a trade war that was launched by the United States for the foreseeable future.
As the press conference continued, news broke that Trump gave Mexico a major exemption.
It is a promising sign, but I will highlight that it means that the tariffs remain in place.
Trump then took to social media, taking a dig at Trudeau, saying he was having fun watching him use the tariff problem to run again for prime minister, even though he's not in the running.
We've been shown too much disrespect by the Trump administration at this point, calling us a 51st state, calling our prime minister governor.
We help them out.
After hours of uncertainty came Trump's big reversal for Canada too.
The reality is they are forced to withdraw measures that they have announced within 24 to 48 hours of having announced them.
In response, Canada is pausing a second wave of tariffs on $125 billion worth of U.S. products until next month, but not withdrawing $30 billion worth already in place.
We have not lifted that because we want to get to a position that we were in 2 weeks ago where there are no tariffs applied.
Premiers say they aren't backing down on their retaliation.
This is unacceptable. And we're going to ensure that the Americans understand how pissed off we are. We don't let up until the president takes the threat off the table.
U.S. alcohol remains off shelves, and on Monday, Ontario is coming out with a new measure.
We're going to put a 25% tariff on electricity coming from Ontario to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota.
That's something the Premier of Manitoba says he's now looking at too, adding that they won't tolerate having the threat of tariffs hang over their head.
So actually, these negotiations with Trump very clearly are about to have a brand new dynamic.
Yeah, Adrian, the bottom line is this trade war is far from over. And by the next deadline on steel and aluminum, Canada will have a new Liberal leader. And whenever they replace Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, they will be the one dealing with all of the chaos, confusion, and changes that come with Trump's threats.
All right, Ashley Burke in Ottawa. Obviously, Canadian businesses are struggling to adapt to this tariff uncertainty. Millions of dollars and thousands of jobs are at risk. Anis Haidari shows us what companies big and small are facing.
Another day, another change to tariffs, and major Canadian businesses are struggling to keep up.
As soon as I get off this interview, I'll check the news ticker to see what might have changed.
Trump's exemption may not fully cover Ontario's Algoma steel, so making business decisions didn't get easier.
I don't know what that delay means, other than we could be here in less than a month, kind of going through the same motions of, is there going to be a tariff? Oh my, there's a tariff. Now, what are we going to do?
Big companies, like this one, are avoiding some spending for now, but the confusion is causing problems for tinier outfits, too.
If you do play the violin, you will know our brand.
For decades, Kuhn has made its musical attachments in Canada. Up to 40% of their sales are in the U.S. and may be tariffed.
The feeling of recklessness of all of this has created tension and uncertainty for us.
And trade experts say Canadian companies need to look to other markets.
That's hard to do for Kuhn. The company is small, less than a dozen employees. So it's hard for them to pivot to replace all of those American customers. There aren't exactly millions of extra violinists in the rest of the world.
The constant changes around who is tariffing what are making it worse. Canadian paper giant KP Tissue is delaying multi-million-dollar investments.
That does not include just the large guys.
This economist says financial decisions are in flux for everyone.
Because there are so many decisions that are being overturned or changed, businesses have a hard time actually adjusting.
This economic whiplash means economic worry for businesses and the Canadians who work at them.
In the face of this uncertainty, it's pretty nerve-wracking for us and for them.
A corporate orchestra where nobody knows the next movement. Anis Haidari, CBC News, Calgary.
Trump's revolving trade threats seem to have finally given provinces the incentive they needed to open up trade within Canada. Olivia Stefanovic shows us the emerging agreement that's being called historic.
Inside most Canadian liquor stores, it's easier to find alcohol from around the world than around the country.
It's ridiculous. This is Canada.
But that could change with a new agreement between most provinces.
I think it's a great idea. I think it should be encouraged.
You know, sometimes it takes a kick in the pants like we've just had.
In the face of U.S. tariffs, domestic trade barriers are coming down.
We have our elbows up because of 25% Trump tariffs, and we are all unified around the table.
All provinces, except PEI and Newfoundland and Labrador, say they will work together to improve access to Canadian beer, wine, and spirits. Welcome news for some BC wineries.
If there's more Canadian wines on restaurant wine lists and in retail stores, then that's going to benefit all of us.
But for others, skepticism remains.
It would be a great thing if they did it. Do I believe that they'll do it? 5%.
It's unclear if the usual markups on imports will be waived for booze from other parts of Canada.
Why should I in BC be treated as a foreign winery in Alberta, Ontario, Quebec?
Also, will strict rules around labeling be relaxed to avoid the cost of repackaging?
Label must say this, the alcohol must be in this position, the barcode must be this format.
The fine details expected to be hashed out over the coming weeks.
My optimism is palpable. The importance of this topic, of delivering up to $200 billion back to the Canadian economy without going through Donald Trump, is incentive.
The federal, provincial, and territorial governments are also working on another major change, a common credential recognition program, so professionals in one part of the country can work in another part of Canada without being recertified. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
In the United States, the censure of a Democratic congressman for heckling Donald Trump led to a remarkable protest in the House.
The House has come to order. The House has come to order. The House has resolved that Representative Al Green be censured.
Democrats began singing the civil rights protest song, "We Shall Overcome," to show support for African-American Rep. Al Green.
The House has come to order. The House has come to order.
On Tuesday night, Green interrupted Trump's joint address to Congress and was removed when he ignored the Speaker's order to be quiet and sit down. After last week's shocking Oval Office confrontation, the U.S. and Ukraine will hold talks aimed at ending the war.
The idea is to get down a framework for a peace agreement and an initial ceasefire as well.
The talks are set to take place next week in Saudi Arabia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he'll be there, but it's still unclear whether Donald Trump will also attend. That announcement comes as European Union leaders hold emergency talks in Brussels over how to quickly increase their military budgets. As Briar Stewart reports, they're responding to signals from the Trump administration that Europe must take care of its own security.
When Ukraine's president arrived to meet EU leaders, he received a warm reception.
It is great that we are not alone. We feel it and we know it. Thank you so much for everything.
Unlike the U.S., which has halted military aid and stopped sharing intelligence with Kyiv, the EU is proposing a more than $1 trillion plan to aid Ukraine and to rearm Europe in the face of what officials say is a threat from Russia.
Spent on defense and deterrence. That's the most important message.
French President Emmanuel Macron went even further, saying he's willing to share France's nuclear arsenal with the country's European neighbors. The French military has nearly 300 nuclear weapons. Russia has nearly 6,000. While speaking to a group of women whose loved ones were killed in the invasion he launched, Russian President Vladimir Putin referenced the historic French retreat from Moscow. There are still people who want to go back to the times of Napoleon, forgetting how it ended, said Putin. Russian officials and the country's state media have ratcheted up verbal attacks on Europe, particularly on the leaders of France and the UK. At the same time, the tone towards the U.S. has softened.
They praised Trump and Vance
for challenging Europe.
Maxime Alyukov is a research associate at King's College London.
So you hear all kinds of swearing words about Macron, Starmer. They do not restrain themselves.
As Europe tries to strengthen its support for Ukraine and its own defenses, its relationship with Moscow will likely grow even tenser. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
While Europe boosts defense spending on Russia's doorstep, Canada is increasing its military presence in the Arctic.
Our competitors are clearly looking to expand their presence here, and Canada cannot stand idly by.
Defense Minister Bill Blair says 3 northern operational support hubs will be built in Iqaluit, Inuvik, and Yellowknife. The hubs will help with military communications and provide storage for supplies. Ottawa plans to spend nearly $2.7 billion on the project over the next 20 years. Well, Ottawa is working to bring home a Canadian teenager stuck behind bars in Poland after he admitted to spying for Russia. His mother believes he was recruited by agents and lured to Russian-occupied Ukraine. Jonathan Gatehouse has the exclusive details.
Yeah, it's hard. You can't do anything for your kid.
The worry comes in waves for Andelaine Nelson. She'd only recently reconnected with her son, Laken Pavin, marveling at how her little boy had become a lanky Army reservist. Then he went backpacking in Europe, and Nelson received an earth-shattering call.
I was told that Laken had been arrested and charged with espionage.
Polish court files say Pavin went from Vancouver to Moscow and then Russian-occupied Ukraine last April to volunteer for an aid organization. Instead, he ended up being recruited by Russian intelligence. On May 21st, he landed in Warsaw with orders to spy on the Polish military. His espionage career ended hours later, after he got drunk in a hotel bar and confessed to police. He's now serving a 20-month sentence.
He turned himself in. He doesn't belong in a Polish jail.
Lawyer John Phillips is advising the family.
This was a troubled kid. He came from a broken home. He was 17 and being manipulated.
The family says CSIS and the RCMP had Laken on their radar before he left. Neither agency would confirm or deny that.
This is exactly the failing of the Canadian system, the Canadian intelligence and police network. They should have shut this down in Canada, but instead he's now suffering in a prison.
This intelligence expert says Russia is recruiting more spies than ever before, choosing quantity over quality.
Russia places very little value on the people that it recruits. It treats the assets with as little value as it treats its own conscripts. They are disposable.
It's not clear if Pavin was targeted for his military ties. The RCMP and multiple government agencies declined to answer questions about the case. What we do know is Global Affairs is talking to Polish authorities and that his family hopes Laken will be home soon. Jonathan Gatehouse, CBC News, Toronto.
Canadians are getting caught up in a tax scam and only learning about it when the Canada Revenue Agency demands its money back.
If I didn't return the $10,000, they had the ability to garnish my wages.
The Fifth Estate investigates the shocking identity theft that is causing Canadians irreparable harm. Your kids' data may be shared if they're into video games.
It is so easy to get information from the kids like this.
CBC Marketplace investigates what the data shows and...
We are not the 51st anything!
A legendary beer ad gets a timely remake.
My name is Jeff, and we are Canadian!
We're back in 2 minutes. Canadian Olympian turned fugitive Ryan Wedding is now on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The reward has been up to $10 million for information leading to his arrest. Wedding competed for Canada as a snowboarder in the 2002 Olympics. He's facing U.S. federal charges for 3 murders, cocaine trafficking, and running a criminal enterprise. Authorities believe he might be in Mexico. A Fifth Estate investigation reveals tonight how scammers are stealing millions from the public purse. They've been hacking into confidential accounts at Canada Revenue Agency, at least 31,000 breaches in recent years. Mark Kelly shows us how blameless taxpayers can end up on the hook.
Thank you.
David Miller was stunned when he learned someone filed a bogus tax return and received an $11,000 refund in his name. Now he has to prove it wasn't him.
At this point, I'm just wondering, like, what's going on? Why all this information has been changed? Who got in? How did they get in?
We have also from Stanley Park, which is
Heidi Gurman found out her identity was stolen when the CRA sent her 2 letters. One stated a tax return filed in her name was bogus.
The second letter said that if I didn't return the $10,000, they had the ability to garnish my wages. That's what freaked me out.
Like more than 40% of Canadians, they used a tax firm to file their taxes. Those tax filers have special codes that allow them to access the CRA network. Our investigation has revealed scammers are obtaining those codes and stealing from the public purse. Bad actors obtain those codes along with stolen identification to file fake tax returns in your name to get tax refunds and then direct the cash to bank accounts they control.
I think it's a free-for-all, essentially.
Shauna Roy knows the problem firsthand. She's a former fraud investigator with the CRA.
For them to steal identities of Canadians and exhaust every, benefit possible.
The commissioner of the CRA, Bob Hamilton, recently said his agency prevents hundreds of thousands of attempts by scammers to hack into your tax accounts.
Where people are at least trying to attack us, I think we're getting better and better at resisting those.
But for victims of tax fraud, the damage is done. David Miller is still waiting for his legitimate tax refund and other government benefits that were frozen by the CRA. His credit rating is shot, he's lost his vehicle, and he's worried his house could be next.
Well, if we lose the house, we lose everything, except we still have each other.
Mark Kelly, CBC News, Miramichi, New Brunswick.
The Fifth Estate's investigation, Tax Hack Identity Theft, airs Friday night at 9 p.m. on CBC Television and GEM, or on YouTube Friday afternoon. And a new CBC Marketplace investigation reveals that your kids' data is being collected while they're playing games, and then that data is being shared.
It says games are not meant to be used if you are under 16.
Wow. But who's buying that data? And Rosie's here with that issue. Hey, Rosie.
Hey, Adrian. Tonight, we're obviously going to talk about the constantly changing trade war.
As long as there are tariffs on us from the United States that are completely unjustified, we will be responding strongly.
Can Ottawa get all U.S. tariffs removed for good? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more.
A CBC Marketplace investigation found advertisers could be using popular game apps to collect sensitive information about kids and then selling that information. That data is revealing. As Christine Birak shows us, she was able to trace a child's steps using only the location data that was for sale.
Sarah Dermody thought she was downloading kid-friendly games.
It said E for everyone.
That's the App Store's content rating, but we show her the developer's privacy policy, excluding its games from laws that protect kids' personal data from being shared.
It says games are not meant to be used if you are under 16.
Wow.
Researchers say many games are attracting kids, even if the privacy policy says they're for adults.
It is really scandalous that it is so easy to get information from the kids like this.
The longer you play, the more money a free game can make through ads and by collecting and sharing information about players with third parties, like how long they play, what characters they select, and their location. Information can then be shared with data brokers worldwide. Posing as game developers, we approach 4 global data companies to test whether data they sell tracks kids.
None of our data will have anyone under 16.
One sends us location data for 700,000 seemingly anonymous devices in Toronto. Intentional or not, we can see the data appears to have children in it, and we confirm a specific child's steps to school, a bus stop, convenience store, and then back home.
No, that doesn't surprise me.
Companies can use data to build profiles of kids too, tracking them across the internet using unique advertising ID codes on their phones and tablets.
So we have a profiling, really a long-term profiling of a person, and we can look at it when he will want to get a job.
Or car insurance or a mortgage. Companies can pay to access people's digital profiles. Parents can limit tracking by changing privacy settings and deleting advertising IDs on devices and telling kids to stop accepting all terms and conditions. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
You can catch the full Marketplace episode, Gaming the System, tomorrow at 8 p.m., 8:30 in Newfoundland, on the main CBC network, or stream anytime on CBC Gem or YouTube. Now, let's break down the week in politics, and what a week. Rosie's here with that issue.
At issue tonight, Trump's trade war. Donald Trump followed through on his decision to bring in tariffs, but is now pausing the action on most Canadian exports.
It's just a modification short term because I didn't want to hurt the American. It would have hurt the American car companies.
Canada is keeping $30 billion in counter tariffs in place, but will pause the second round.
As long as there are tariffs on us from the United States that are completely unjustified, we will be responding strongly.
So what does this trade war mean for Canadians? How is Ottawa working to get these tariffs removed entirely? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down. The latest on this trade war, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. Nice to see you all on a very, very busy week. Chantal, I'll start with you. Is this a win, a delay, a reprieve? Where do you think we are today?
Well, I guess it's a win because we didn't give up anything. And if you thought that we were having a conversation with serious people, I guess this week has demonstrated that that's not happening. But the notion that we're pausing the second wave of tariffs because suddenly there's been this second reprieve actually means, that second wave was supposed to kick in on March 21st by my calendar, and we've postponed it by about a week. So I guess that is where we are today, with the sense that we are talking to people who are so unserious that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
And with other tariffs hanging over our head, Andrew, steel and aluminum next week, whatever's going to happen in reciprocal tariffs in April, it is hard to know what's going to happen next, that's for sure.
We're by no means out of the woods.
Yeah.
The one thing we have going for us, I've said this all along, is the people opposed to Trump and his people are not very bright. They haven't thought this through. They don't know how government works. They don't know how the economy works. And they don't seem to be familiar with basic politics. It was to be entirely predicted that if you bring in these kinds of tariffs, you're going to make a lot of people hurt in the United States, and a lot of consumers and a lot of interests that have been squawking quite loudly. It seems to have come as a surprise to Donald Trump, or perhaps he was surprised that Canada didn't roll over. But as somebody put it, we're almost in the position of Ukraine having the kind of defender advantage here. When your back is to the wall, when your country's existence, so to speak, is at stake, people are going to be up for the fight. And if I read Canadian public opinion at all well, people have basically said to the government, do what you have to do. Yeah. Just stick it to these bastards. We'll take whatever price we have to take to do it. Whereas in the United States, nobody signed up for this. None of Trump's constituencies voted for him because they wanted to have a trade war with Canada. So I think we're seeing that asymmetry here where the Canadian government has public opinion very firmly at its back. The Trump administration does not.
What do you make of where we are on Thursday, as the Prime Minister himself said today? This is just Thursday now with Donald Trump.
Well, it's more than just Thursday. It's the last Thursday, perhaps, that he's the Prime Minister. Yeah. It is also, 3 days after these tariffs were levied. I don't think it's clear to the government, never mind to the rest of the country, what the Americans want. What is the end goal that they are after? Is this just about raising revenue? Is this about more public policy asks? It's very clearly not about fentanyl. Yeah. And the government has always, frankly, known that it wasn't about fentanyl. But it is not clear what the ask is. So, and if you don't know what the other side is asking for, you don't know what off-ramp to give them. And I feel like that's the position that they're in. Like you heard the Foreign Affairs Minister talk about, well, in the meetings, they bring up Five Eyes intelligence. They bring up bulk water exports. They bring up defense spending. What does any of that have to do with, cars coming across the Ontario border back and forth in car parts? Like, not much. So you can understand why it just feels like constant chaos and why even that as a strategy doesn't seem to make any sense. I mean, today, the president was out there trumpeting his own executive order, amending his own tariffs, saying he was saving the American auto industry and American farmers from the tariffs that he had imposed 2 days earlier. It doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't want to say that I always agree with Andrew, but like, I think we have to open ourselves to the possibility that maybe they're just stupid.
Well, and also, we did have that extraordinary statement from the Prime Minister that the president's, to the best that anybody can parse out his aims, it's to basically just harm us and weaken us so that at some point, people will be so fed up with it that there'll be movements towards annexation or economic union or what have you. It sounds far-fetched, but nothing's far-fetched with Donald Trump. And certainly when there's no, as Althea is saying, when there's no concrete demand, there's nothing we can actually, there's no blackmail we can even pay, that has to be your working supposition, which is why we need to look at this in the long run and say, okay, he's on his back heel today, but he's going to be back. He's going to have other demands and other tariffs, and we've got to be prepared to tough this out through the long haul.
Yeah, Chantal?
So one, I think we did the right thing. Not to say thank you and we're going to back off on whatever we're doing. I think that was the smart thing to do. Two, I think that this second, we back off from the U.S. perspective is probably meant to try to divide Canadians, or at least Canadian politicians, which I don't think is going to happen, given the mood of the country. And three, with the 51st state thing, Donald Trump probably did a service to whoever is running the government, in the sense that the stakes are so high that there's no mood out there. And I tried to find who is arguing in the mainstream to say we should be nice, and there's no one saying that, because he is up this game to a level where no one wants to play in that movie. So going forward, I don't know, but I guess the good news is they don't seem to have much of a great plan.
No, and they were, I also think part of it, Althea, is that they were met with a serious, coordinated response from this country that maybe they just didn't expect. I don't know.
I don't know how they could not have expected, frankly. I mean, there was nothing in the government's game plan that has changed in the last 6 to 8 weeks. So the government was told that this was coming and they planned for it. And even the amount of money, I believe, is exactly the same as it was when they first communicated this plan to us. So it's not, they've been waiting to implement their plan. I do agree that by raising, and by the Prime Minister raising the bar to the 51st state level, it has brought Canadians together in a way that when you have, it's not just one part of the economy, it's our national sovereignty is now affected. And so the cost that you're willing to bear as an individual, I mean, at the moment, for most of us, we're not really feeling, maybe if you looked at your savings, if you have stocks, and maybe if you have money, you have felt the pain. But there aren't that many people who have actually lost their jobs in the last 4 days. But in the next 2 weeks, in the next 4 weeks, in the next 6 months, that is going to be really different. And so by having raised that specter of what that pain tolerance is like, that was, in a way, really smart, because there are more people that are going to be willing to accept acute pain because they think that the risk is so high.
Yeah, and it keeps the country united in a way that maybe wouldn't have happened either. Okay, that was all very smart. We're going to keep kind of talking about this in the next section, but in a different way. When we come back, we're going to look ahead to the Liberal Leadership Convention.
I intend to win on Sunday, and when I win, I will invite Mark to serve as finance minister in my government.
So the Liberal Party will have a new leader this Sunday. How are the candidates preparing their response to the trade war? What does this change for Canada? That's next. At issue, Liberal leadership. The race is almost over. A new leader will be announced Sunday and will become Prime Minister within days. Then take on the trade war.
We need a united Canada right now that can stand up to that tariff threat.
We have to be very clear with the Americans that this action is inappropriate.
If I'm elected as Prime Minister, to take the proceeds from our counter tariffs and ensure that they go directly to those workers.
So, how to break down how the race is ending. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea are back. You're all going to be here Sunday too. I'm excited to see you in person. But what are you thinking now as this race ends, Andrew? And I think, perhaps more importantly, this person who wins on Sunday is going to have to be thrown into the middle of all of this immediately.
Yeah, well, it's a different setting than it was at the beginning of the race, partly because the Liberal support in the polls has come up so much since then. Only, I think, partially because of the race itself, but maybe partly in that, but mostly as a result of events south of the border. So, it's they've got a little bit of a different strut in their step, perhaps. Mark Carney has not had a great race, if you ask me. He's not exactly set hearts on fire. There's been a few questions raised about his veracity, but it's hard to see anybody else winning at this point. I hate to just thump home the conventional wisdom, but that sure seems like the case. I think the other thing is, I think there was a lot of talk that, as soon as he gets in, he'll want to go straight to the election. I'm not so sure that's the case for a couple of reasons. One is, I think if you're him, you surely would rather be seen to be governing for a bit. You'd rather be putting together a cabinet, meeting Parliament, et cetera. And I think you can do so now. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. But I'm getting signals from the NDP that they're not quite as keen as on voting no confidence anytime soon. That may have something to do with them being down at 10% in the polls.
Yeah,
but
yes.
I don't think it's a given that the minute they meet Parliament that they're going down. And maybe rightly so, if we're right in the middle of an April 2nd next round of tariffs.
Except Mark Carney doesn't have a seat in the House, so that would be, I think, a problem, Althea, if he turns out to be the winner. But give me your sense of where we're at as this race comes to an end.
Well, Andrew is right, but it's also because the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, has plainly said he's willing to support the government again. I am going to disagree with Andrew. I actually believe that whoever is elected, assuming, let's say it is Mark Carney, that he is incentivized to go quickly because the Conservatives are sitting on all this cash, and they will use it to bombard the airways and try to frame him with the time that they have, the extra time that they have. I think it would have been beneficial to the party to have a much longer leadership race if the Prime Minister had decided to resign in the autumn, because I don't think that any of the candidates have been properly tested. The last leadership race was quite long, maybe arguably too long. Mm-hmm. But the first few instances that we have seen about Mr. Carney, I mean, if he's chosen on Sunday, he will be the Prime Minister. And we don't have a very clear idea of how he would govern, what his priorities would be, what his value set is, how he handles pressure. It has been very, very short. And neither do we have such a clear idea of the others, more so Ms. Freeland, but that's because we have seen her for the past 10 years. Yeah. And so it would have been beneficial to have a longer leadership race. That being said, that's the timing the Prime Minister gave the Liberal Party, and so that's what they have to deal with.
Chantal?
Yeah.
I think the last thing we need is more months of will the government survive, will the government not survive? And I have, since last fall, been of the school of we need a prime minister, pick whoever you want, but we need a prime minister who's got a mandate. It can't be someone who is a future lame duck or an actual lame duck. And on that basis, I don't really see the upside of coming in with a speech from the throne and all that involves, because that is what it means to reopen Parliament. When what we do need is for Canadians to choose the person who's going to be leading them, at least for the next 2 years, maybe 4, depending if it's minority or majority. But that choice belongs to Canadians, and I think they need to make that choice sooner, not later.
Yeah, it does seem, Andrew, as difficult as it might be to have an election with all of this hanging over our heads, it does seem as though it is kind of critical that Canadians get to weigh in on this now.
Yeah.
Like, we've talked about how people are united, but that they get to weigh in on the person and the approach. I know you're not saying differently. I'm just saying it feels like it's the moment for that, you know?
I don't disagree. I'm just saying from the Liberal standpoint,
Sure.
you know, they might want to wait, but we'll see. But I agree with Chantal that we need, I mean, as I say, there's the specific thing of April 2nd being the deadline for another round. And so whether you have to have an election right exactly at that moment, but sooner rather than later, absolutely. And yeah, we need to clear the air. We need to have a clear sense that the person leading the country actually is leading the country, has the people at their back. We're going through right now a period of intense national unity because we're right in the middle of the fires.
Yeah.
But to come back to the point I was making earlier, this is going to be a long slog, and we're going to need to keep the public on side, and that's going to need leadership that has a genuine bona fide mandate to be able to do that.
Althea?
Well, if we're talking about election timing, whoever's leader is incentivized to go sooner, not just because that person may not have a seat in the House, but why let a good crisis go to waste? You know, now is the moment where everybody is united. Now is the moment where there's the least pain. You never know what's going to come around the corner at you. The challenge, though, is if you want to put a fresh face on the government, you're incentivized to keep a lot of the same players in your cabinet as caretakers because of what has just happened. And the roadmap that has already been set by the current government is likely the roadmap that you're going to continue because your transition may only be a week or two and you may not have time to develop a new strategy and to meet with the premiers and to get everybody on side. I think from a strategic point of view, there may not be such a difference put forward if there is a campaign so quickly.
But you wouldn't want to get rid of people who have contacts and relationships with people south of the border. Yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
But
Chantal?
that's the challenge about being different and then being the same.
Totally. Chantal?
But it's possible to do one and the other. Let me talk about the current finance minister, Dominique Leblanc, strengthened his own right in Atlantic Canada. Why would you want to get rid of someone who can carry a region? And who also happens to play well in Ontario and Quebec and is friends with the Conservative Premier of Ontario. So it's not as if everyone on that team is not someone you would want on your election team.
That's right.
And as for changing directions, if you believe, as I do, that the overriding question is going to be about tariffs and Trump, then you're not going to go into the weeds of would you keep dental care and how would you fund it. You're going to want to. It's kind of a plebiscite on who you want, not an election about which platform do you pick.
Though those issues could be important, right? If you're thinking about how the Canadian economy might fall apart, those things might matter to you.
Okay, as important as they were in the Ontario election, which I believe is a template for the federal election.
Chantal always says good things at the end. Quickly, Andrew.
Every election's different, and you never know exactly what the public's going to have as their main priority. But I think in the current climate, absolutely, it's going to be who can handle this crisis.
Okay, that is it for us tonight. We're going to continue this conversation and talk about Justin Trudeau's legacy. You can catch that on YouTube or on the podcast. Now back to Adrienne in Toronto.
You bet, Rosie. Thank you. Coming up, a new take on a Canadian classic. How Jeff from Canada is taking on Trump with a new rallying call. Next in our moment. Donald Trump's tariffs and threats to make Canada a 51st state have inspired a rousing new version of a very Canadian ad that struck a chord with this country 25 years ago. Actor and CBC broadcaster Jeff Douglas put together this new rallying cry with the help of anonymous creative types. The patriotic remake is our moment.
Hey.
That's Jeff Douglas, 25 years after being the face of the iconic I Am Canadian ad for Molson. Jeff's remake leans a lot more into our southern neighbor.
They mistake our modesty for meekness, our kindness for consent, our nation for another star on their flag, and our love of a hot, cheesy poutine with their love of a hot, cheesy Putin.
If you don't recall the original, here's how it started.
Hey, I'm not a lumberjack or a fur trader.
Gaining intensity as he proclaimed who we are.
I have a prime minister, not a president.
Canada is
Jeff's new version is no longer an ad for a product, but it still stirs that Canadian pride.
This is the land of the peacekeeper and the Shawinigan handshake. Are we perfect? No, but we are not the 51st anything. We are the first to unite in a crisis, the first to build bridges, not walls, and the first to stand on guard for thee. My name is Jeff, and we are Canadian. Thank you.
You tell him, Jeff. I don't know about you, but so many people have been sending us this video from all over the country. We get it. It is fantastic. One quick note. It was such a big deal 25 years ago that a Calgary Herald article said that bar patrons were asking for the volume to be turned up so they could all say the words together. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.